what we're seeing in markets where account-to-account payments is still growing is the ability for account-to-account payments and our partnership with Mastercard to address some of the burning places where consumers have problems paying. High-value payments is a good example of that. There are often limits depending on the type of payment method that you have, where you can't reach a certain threshold and go beyond that because your bank will reject the payment. Open banking provides opportunity for consumers to make those payments digitally that they may not have been able to before. So I think those two, like from a market perspective, we're doing really great in Finland. From a use case perspective, I think we're opening new frontiers when it comes to high value payments.
All right, Nabeel, Ian, it's great to meet you. Thank you very much for seeing us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, before we start, just briefly tell us who you are and what you do.
Sure. So I'm Nabeel Moosa. I work at Nexi Group, which is a pan-European diversified payment service provider. I work in the e-commerce business unit leading the strategy team. So how do we grow our portfolio? How do we ensure merchants can seamlessly accept payments and create high conversion for their consumers?
Great. Ian?
Ian White, I'm from Mastercard. I lead our go-to-market for open banking in Europe, based in London.
Okay, so we're here because Nexi Group and Mastercard have recently started a partnership. Just tell us, what was the basis of the partnership and what were the synergies that you were looking for when you came together as?
Sure. I guess, so as you mentioned, open banking, it's a new-ish framework depending on which market you operate in across Europe. If you think about it from a industry perspective, there's always regulation, there's technical change and changing consumer habits, and they're creating new ways to pay. Open banking and account-to-account payments are one of these new ways to pay. And we're constantly, as a payment service provider towards merchants, looking for the newest payment methods that consumers are using, but merchants can also use to increase acceptance across different use cases they have. So we were out in the market looking for a partner to work with us across Europe. And Mastercard was one of the providers that we spoke to, and we really liked the service that they provided, the quality of the product, and of course the way we work together. And so we decided to work with Mastercard on implementing open banking and offering that to our merchants across Europe.
Account-to-account is a newish space overall, but it's an important space on the European payment scene. It's already contributing roughly 20% of all e-commerce volumes, and that's split at the moment across maybe three main areas. The first being bank transfers, the second being local domestic, predominantly domestic account-to-account schemes, and then finally open banking. To touch on open banking specifically, as this is really the basis of the partnership, it's not new. It was formed under the umbrella, if you like, of PSD2. So taken some time maybe to come to fruition. There's been probably some challenges in the past, both on the supply side in terms of a lack of standardization or fragmentation of suppliers, but also on the demand side. Consumers probably weren't aware of what open banking was. Some of the initial use cases were suffered a little bit from a poor user experience. But really, we've started to see a big change in this in the last 12 to 18 months across Europe. And that's really anchored on, some really compelling use cases that are, proving out the value to consumers, to merchants, to businesses, etc. A pipeline of innovation, such as recurring payments that help to optimize subscription or direct debit type payments as well. And also, continued regulatory involvement and support to try to drive this forward. So, in short, a very exciting space and something that we're very happy and excited to be partnering with the Nexi Group on.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we always get extremely excited when we see companies coming together and forming partnerships. We always believe that this is the case with 1 + 1 equals more than 2, right? So from your perspective, what do you think has been the exponential results of the synergies that have been brought together from the capabilities of both organizations?
Yeah, it's a very good observation as well. Firstly, just to comment on the partnership, because we operate in a complex ecosystem all the way from banks to consumers, actually, all the way along. So bringing companies together who have one singular focus on increasing payment experiences and improving payment experiences and increasing conversion for the ecosystem, super good. I think, this isn't the first step actually in the partnership. Maybe we should have done some background. But Mastercard and ourselves as Nexi Group have been working together for a number of years. PayTrail is one of our brands in Finland who operate in a market where account-to-account payments are actually quite predominant. Depending on the merchant type, it can be up to 80% of the payment mix. And in those markets, we are changing from a more proprietary solution to the cutting edge of account-to-account or open banking payments, and working with Mastercard on that to make sure we have a solution that's as good as what previously existed, if not better, for those merchants has been great. In markets where account-to-account payments, for example, are new, driven by regulation, PSD2, other open banking implementations, we're working really closely together with Mastercard on ensuring that the merchant experience is good, all the way from integrating these new payment methods to the consumer experience, ensuring that conversion is as high as the alternative payment methods that exist in the market. Of course, there are many of those payment methods today, quite digital, very mobile based. So not only are we finding and ensuring that as we work together, we get the best payment experience out there for the consumers, we're also ensuring that the use case fit, I think Ian mentioned some of them already, high value payments, for example, recurring payments, can we provide as a good an experience possible that overcome the challenges that exist with other payment methods. And I think open banking really has a place to play in the future of payments.
Right, again, and let me just stay with you, Nabeel, because I would love to understand what are the more practical benefits that merchants are experiencing from being that speciality provided by the partnership with Mastercard when it comes to account payments?
Yeah, sure. So I would always differentiate between markets where account-to-account payments are quite prominent already. In those markets, the user experience that we're able to provide, the reliability, the trust that merchants need to have in payments is definitely apparent in the partnership that we have with Mastercard. I think whichever type of payment method that exists, trust is a really important factor, and security is a really important factor. So our baseline for the partnership with Mastercard had to encompass those two capabilities. And then, of course, comes the consumer side, because they're ultimately the deciders of which payment method. So account-to-account payments, yes, can exist because merchants and payment service providers decide to create a partnership. But actually, it's the consumers who decide whether that payment method is going to be successful or not. And so ensuring and working closely with Mastercard on our implementation, collaborating together to really understand the end-to-end user journey for a merchant, but also the end-to-end user journey for a consumer, to ensure that they are picking account-to-account payments where it makes sense for them. And the merchants have the best experience on offer for them, has been a really core part of the partnership and why we selected Mastercard.
Right. So, Ian, we know that Mastercard has been very actively forming partnerships, and that there's a very strong partnership strategy. So can you tell us a little bit about how does the partnership with Nexi Group align with the overall partnership strategy for Mastercard?
Yeah, sure, happy to. So account-to-account payments is really core to what we do as Mastercard in our overall payment strategy. We are not a card company, we are a multi-rail payment company. And we have made a series of steps over the last few years to move in that direction. Started, for example, with the acquisition of Vocalink in the UK, and then, expanded that through a series of acquisitions, including Nets Business Services here in the Nordics. So in some ways, open banking is a natural extension of that. It allows us as Mastercard to provide both data but also payment services agnostic of the underlying infrastructure, and therefore it's core to what we do, and we're investing quite heavily. We've made a series of acquisitions, and we have more than 1,000 people dedicated on open banking globally. So it's really core to what we do. Why do we think it's important? I'd say two reasons. Firstly, it allows us to access areas or payments types that probably traditionally Mastercard wasn't playing in. So I'm referring to bill payments, direct debits, bank app initiated payments such as P2P or person-to-person transfers, for example. And so that creates, through open banking, it creates a space for Mastercard to add value through some of the proven tools or services that we're traditionally applied to digital payments, such as biometric authentication, app-to-app redirection, one-click checkout, to kind of rise up, improve the overall experience, the convenience, security, as Nabeel was mentioning, of the payments that, again, back to my first point, we weren't really playing in. So that's point number one. Point number two, the reason why we're in open banking is not, as a standalone proposition, but is to help us, together with our partners like the Nexi Group, add value and expand their overall proposition to their customers. So to give you an example on the issuer side, integrating open banking services like data, for example, to improve the credit decisioning process of our banks, speed up or improve decision-making and application process. That's one example. On the PSP or the acquirer side, clearly through open banking, we're helping our partners provide a bit more of a turnkey or end-to-end solution that covers, card payments, of course, the direct debits and open banking in one solution that works for the customers and merchants in their markets.
Right, great. One of the things that we know about the Nordics is that they're pretty advanced when it comes to payment methods. Yeah. And maybe it's a question for both of you. When we look at towards how the Nordics have been providing functionality for payments to happen immediately, to happen across border, especially within the Scandinavian region. I always wonder what is left to be done when it comes to payments. What's the next innovative functionality that payments companies can offer merchants and customers?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I guess payments is not static as a way we provide services. I would say it's also not static in expectations of consumers. So there may be one thing that's important to merchants and consumers today. That's the speed that you get through the payments life cycle. Something that could be more important in the future is the cost. Or another thing that could be important in the future is just the consumer experience. What's the experience end to end? So they are the ultimate decider of what they choose to pay with. So it's hard to say what's left, but I would say there would be, speed is an important factor of payments that's continuously evolving. We're moving towards a space in Europe where instant payments regulation is coming into force. That only affects some of the use cases. I think with open banking, it opens up the opportunity for that to be applicable in a more consumer-oriented environment online, in retail environments that it wasn't before. And I think if you look at it from the merchant perspective, conversion is of course important, but cost is also important. So how open banking evolves and changes the dynamics within the ecosystem is also going to be important for merchants and how they see the cost of payments changing over time.
Nabeel, you've been saying that trust and security is very important for customers. So what I wanted to understand is from the Mastercard perspective, how is Mastercard ensuring that there is security in all these transactions, especially with the immediacy that you have now when it's an account-to-account transfer?
No, it's an excellent question, and I'd probably break it down into a few points. Firstly, if we start with open banking specifically as an overall industry, one of the beauties of this payment method is that it is all consumer consent driven. So whether that's initiating a payment or providing access for your data to be used by a third party to inform and offer to you as a consumer are completely in control of that. And there's been very comprehensive regulation built around moving that information in a consented way from point A to point B. So I think as an overall method, it's very it's grounded in the right principles. Let's just say that. Point number two, Nabeel's mentioned it. You mentioned it in the intro to the question. If we are living in Europe. It's maybe not the same in other regions across the world, but we are living in quite an advanced market from a digital payments perspective. And therefore, this is not necessarily about catching new consumers. It's about moving consumers from a method to another method. And so to get that right, it has to be grounded in those principles you talked about around security and trust and convenience, etc. So if you don't get that right, it's a non-starter. And so that leads me to point three, which is, as a Mastercard, we know how to scale payment methods, and we know that security and trust in some ways are table stakes, and we wouldn't be moving into a space that would offer a service that wasn't up to those same standards. And therefore, whether it's specifically within open banking or leveraging our broader tools, capabilities, services across the group that help with, for example, preventing app takeover, adding extra layers of fraud and security into payment initiation, opening accounts and onboarding consumers. These are the kind of businesses and capabilities that Mastercard has been acquiring over the last few years to really build out that fraud and security offering that we are now applying to open banking.
The partnership is fairly recent, right? At least with Nexi Group. What have been some of the early successes that you have seen in this collaboration?
I think definitely, we've talked a little bit about PayTrail already. I think that is an example of proven success. We were operating in a market with PayTrail where account-to-account payments was already prominent. So you had to be at least as good as the alternatives out there. And I think there were three key metrics that we looked at: reliability, trust from the consumer perspective, and of course the impact to conversion, which is ultimately what we discussed many times. The consumer is the one who decides if something is good enough or not. And with PayTrail in Finland, we've seen a significant amount of volume and traction, not just matching what we had previously, but actually growing our share of payments on account to account. So I think that's one of the proven successes. What we're seeing in markets where account to account payments is still growing is the ability for account-to-account payments and our partnership with Mastercard to address some of the burning places where consumers have problems paying. High-value payments is a good example of that. There are often limits depending on the type of payment method that you have, where you can't reach a certain threshold and go beyond that because your bank will reject the payment. Open banking provides opportunity for consumers to make those payments digitally that they may not have been able to before. So I think those two, from a market perspective, we're doing really great in Finland. from a use case perspective, I think we're opening new frontiers when it comes to high value payments.
I would just build on that. I'd approach it from two angles. Firstly, in terms of just the Mastercard and the Nexi Group coming together, and I think how that adds value overall for this, and then some of the initial learnings that we have from success today. So firstly, I mean, when we talk about the partnership coming together, you know, for us, we were very, very excited to work with the Nexi Group for a couple of reasons. Number one, they have fantastic scale. You know, they're working with more than 2 million merchants across, you know, roughly 25 markets or so in Europe. So they have unparalleled scale to try and make something happen, number one. And then number two, they also have a track record of being very, very successful in account-to-account payments specifically. So PayTrail in Finland is one example, but they also have P24 in Poland and many other of their group gateways that are really driving a lot of traction in account-to-account payments. So they know how to get these factors that we keep talking about in terms of how to optimize conversion, how to build security and trust with a very good user experience. And so that combined with, you know, Mastercard, who has a track record of running, you know, payment networks at scale, you know, created a lot of excitement for us as a potential to really make this happen. So that's point one. In terms of you know, bringing it to life with PayTrail, we touched on it already, but I think there's been some really good progress there. Some of those initial use cases that are really, you know, not only making payments simple in terms of removing any of the friction that's involved with like a traditional account-to-account payment and bringing a lot of those tools and services that we would traditionally associate with a digital payment to streamline the user experience in real time. But also increase the security, leveraging proven methods like biometrics authentication, app-to-app redirection in proven channels. And those benefits really apply right across the chain from merchants to consumers. So I think it's a really good example, and it gives us a lot of confidence, a lot of the work that we're doing, you know, with other gateways and other markets within the Nexi Group to try and really scale this partnership successfully.
All right, that's really interesting. So is there anything that Finland is doing specifically well that could be adopted by the other Nordic markets?
It's very hard to compare across markets. I think each market has its own habits, its own expectation, and its own like micro ecosystem. So we typically tend not to compare across markets. We try to see Europe as a collection of different markets and not one standardized way of doing things. So, but there are particular characteristics that I think carry across. I think trust is an important factor. I think our partnership with MasterCard really exhibits that because the MasterCard brand is trusted across and known across the world, actually not just within Europe. That's an important factor for consumers when they're deciding which payment method to pay with or not, and seeing the MasterCard brand, that really adds a lot. I think what we can learn from is the advances in designing an account-to-account payment experience online, especially when you're comparing it, for example, to card payments, which are predominant in a lot of markets across Europe. So definitely learning from the way we've adapted, working with MasterCard, the payment journey in the account-to-account space across markets, so that we can make sure that the payment journey that consumers get create the most conversion as possible in those markets where it's not so common.
No, look, I think it's a fantastic summary from Nabeel. Maybe I'd add a couple of points. You know, I think as we discussed in the intro, you know, open banking as a subset of account-to-account payments took a while since the introduction of the regulation to really gain traction. But where we have seen it gain traction has, you know, been in markets or in use cases where open banking is proven to add value. So, you know, for example, some of the use cases around bill payments, for example, high ticket transactions, or, you know, transactions where there's a kind of real need to get, you know, real-time funds fast into the hands of the merchants, for example. These are areas where we've seen probably in the past a bit of a clunky user experience, you know, multiple clicks, like going between different channels, you know, manual entry of information. And therefore, you know, the partnership that we've been able to build together and we continue to build is like knocking away each of these points of friction to create a much better experience and driving real traction. I think those are the kind of tipping points that we've seen in markets like Finland, but kind of more broadly now across Europe, where, you know, consumers are getting more and more comfortable with this as a payment method. You know, and as a result, you know, probably willing to experiment maybe a little bit more. And that is in some ways opening up to slightly more exotic use cases where we see In a way, probably other payment methods aren't able to do so, but under open banking, combining both payment and data experiences together to deliver something truly differentiated.
Nabeel, Ian, it's of course really exciting what's happening and seeing the result of this fantastic partnership. What's in the future? What are you looking forward to in the way that this partnership will continue to develop?
One thing, I don't know if you can call it the elephant in the room, but regulation is constantly evolving in Europe as well. And I think with the advent of PSD3, we'll also see some changes and some guidance on how we can improve open banking and account-to-account payments across Europe. So I think it's a mix of practical learning in the field and then also expecting some change in the regulatory landscape to come, which will take us to that next frontier in account payments.
Right, of course, which hopefully will also open additional opportunities.
Absolutely. And I think from our perspective, we see regulation as driving opportunity. PSD2 did that. They created a more open playing field, more collaborative environment to drive account-to-account payments to this stage. And I think we'll see further growth beyond that as well.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, Ian, Nabeel, thank you very much for spending time with us and for sharing all the great successes that you have had so far from this partnership.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.